Hey everybody, it's Brett Loveday here from ThinkSync Group Limited. Guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are keeping all well. Listen, a very quick update. I'm going to try and keep this video as short as possible. Since the lockdown of COVID, I'm sure there are many individuals and businesses that were quite severely affected by that. And ThinkSync is the same. We were, and I argue we still are, we are a people's business. I really honestly, hand on heart, going on site, being with customers. And since the lockdown, that's all stopped. So this is really just I suppose it's a start. It's a start for me because I want to go back at that and reach back out to customers. And I'm going to be doing a series of these videos just to get the ball rolling. I'm very keen to get back out in the field, being with customers, because that's where I'm most comfortable. So I'm going to start with these series of videos, and this video is for anybody that's using Citrix will probably know where I'm coming from, and this is where I'm urging you to fight for your users. What does that actually mean? My day-to-day life, I see problems that should not exist today, and it saddens me that we still see these problems. So I'm on a drive. I'm on a drive to educate, and that's my main objective here. And my main objective is to fight for your users. I hope that makes sense. So this is going to be a relatively quick video, I pray. And I'm going to dive straight into this, and I urge you, if you do have Citrix, I beg you to continue to watch this. And if you don't get anything insightful from it, just tell me. I genuinely want to help. So in this first video, I'm going to be talking about fighting for your users, and it's going to be a generalized presentation. So before we start, we get the boring stuff out of the way first. Just a little bit about ThinkSync. We have a mission statement here, and that mission statement is it says here we want every organisation to be delighted with their virtual IT experience. What we actually mean there is we don't want people to even know they're using a virtual desktop. Okay, and that isn't easy to do. And I'm going to give you a demo today to show you the art of the possible, what you can achieve if you do it right. I did an article a number of years back, and it was called Getting It Right First Time is Not Easy. And it really isn't, because you have to know every single nut and bolt how this all bolts together. Because bear in mind, Citrix is a technology that sits on other technology. And so whenever we see problems with Citrix, it is never a problem with Citrix. It's always a problem elsewhere. Okay? So we move on. So this is the boring stuff. We've been around for many years, guys, and we have done hundreds of thousands of desktops to some of the largest companies in the UK. In fact, we take pride in that. Now, my goal is to have no distinguishable difference between a physical computer and a virtual desktop. And I'm going to break out of this because I'm going to show you what I mean. Rather than actually just say words, I'm going to show you. Okay, what we're looking at here is I've logged on to our Netscaler, and we're going to be logging on to a desktop. This desktop is running the latest version of Citrix. It's a session-based desktop, which means it's running an RDSH, so Microsoft Terminal Services, on a Windows Server 2019 box, and we're running session-based desktops. These desktops will be what we call non-persistent. And that when you log off, they get a full factory reset. They're read-only images. And what we want to demonstrate in this is the user experience. So within this demo, there are all of the tweaks that we've put in place to give the best possible user experience. So all of the optimizations, the complete reskinning of Windows Server operating system. And I'm going to show you some of that today, in effort to fight for your users. And that is, I don't want the users to know they're using a virtual desktop. And why should they know? And you will see within this demo, if you give this desktop to the users, they will no way know that they're running on a shared hosted desktop on a server operating system, and there will be no distinction factor between that and their local PC. We've reskinned it to look like Windows 10, and I promise you guys, if you give your users this desktop, they'll be very happy with it. And we found this is by far the most cost-effective way to roll out virtual desktops. I challenge you to find a better way, because we cannot find it. This is by far the most cost-effective way of rolling out virtual desktops, where you're running session-based desktops, overlaying it with Citrix to give the best possible user experience, and running what we call non-persistent session-based desktops. So you don't get a full desktop, you're getting a session on a server. All the magic happens. Okay, so we're going to be showing some of our secrets that we put in place over the years to make user experience as best as we possibly can. So I'm going to be logging on to this desktop here. Let me launch it. And what I'm going to be looking for is really quick logon, because that's what the user wants. They want the desktop to be instantly accessible. Now, that was pretty nifty. So we're going to do some things in here. So let's test it. We're going to open up Microsoft Word or Outlook, not Outlook, probably. I don't want my email. Excuse me. And we're going to use it. You can see there's no delay in typing. We can insert, I don't know, pictures. Yeah, we just insert some pictures. We can manipulate this. And just using this, it's very snappy. There are no delays. It's, from a user's point of view, you will not be able to tell that this is not running on your machine. Let me close that. It's the same for PowerPoint. It's the same for any Microsoft application, to be honest with you. Now, one of the other gripes that we get quite frequently with Citrix is how does it work with Microsoft Teams? And I can tell you now that we've got Teams running in here absolutely fine. The technology is clever. You can do video calls, you can do voice call, and you get no lag and you get no delay. And the other gripe that we get is, what about video? You know, what about YouTube? Well, let's test it. Let's test it. Let's go on YouTube. And let's run the highest resolution, a 12K video, 120 frames of video. Right, I had to skip the adverts. Okay, this is a test. This is running 120 frames a second. Really high resolution YouTube video. If we look at the stats here, as we can see, we're running at 1412 by 794. Let's run this full screen. Let's really test it. Let's take that out of the way. Let's really test it. Run it full screen. I don't know about you, but I think that's bloody impressive. So I'm going to stop this. There are zero issues with no matter what resolution video you're running. Now, what we've done within this desktop is say we've completely reskinned it. We've reskinned it to make it look identical to Windows 10. There is no way the users can actually know that they're using this. If we push Control-Alt-Delete, we've even removed the Windows Server logo. You know, so there is no way for a user to know that, one, they're not running on Windows 10, they're running on a Windows Server operating system. Two, they've got no way of knowing this is a shared desktop with many other users, and you're just a session on a server. It's impossible for the users to know this. So that's one of the secret layers that we apply to our virtual desktop. And one of the areas which is not so visible here is, you saw how quick it was to log in. We have a proprietary profile management solution on a non-persistent desktop environment. Profiles become a big issue. We're going to cover that again in a minute and show you how we overcome those particular types of issues. But I promise you guys, if you give this to your users, they'll be very happy with this desktop. And bear in mind, this is the desktop that will run on any device, any network, any place, anytime. Okay, so you're tying services not to devices, you're tying services to the user. So the user gets a desktop from any device. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking. Right, I'm going to go back to the slide deck and we're going to cover this in a bit more detail. Right, one of the many challenges that we highly encourage the IT support staff or the consultants who are involved in deploying Citrix is to avoid what we call the bloat challenge. And what is the bloat challenge? And the bloat challenge is, hear me out, because if you're doing what I'm about to say, please stop. Okay, please, I beg you to stop. If you think that you can create one image with every single application working all nice and neatly on there on one image, I'd say you've just created yourself a hell of a scenario there, because every single time, guys, girls, whoever's going to be doing this, if there's ever a change to any application, guess what? You're going to have to redeploy the desktop every single time there's a change. And that's not good for you, and that is not good for the end users. And I say to you, stop. There is a much, much better way of doing things. I'm going to just cover this, and this is just one of the topics that I'm going to be covering today about protecting your users. And it's all about user experience that I'm fighting for at the end of the day. So this slide looks very busy, and I get it, and I don't want it to daunt you. However, I'm just going to breeze over things today, and there will be further videos. So if you want to know more about this, my contact details will be at the end of this presentation. Please, I urge you to contact me. This stuff is all free. I'm not here on some second agenda. I genuinely want to help. This slide deck, it looks more complex than it really needs to be. So this section here, where it's got the core OS deployment, and it says here Enterprise Layer Manager, I want you to forget that for a moment. And I want you to forget it because it's almost irrelevant. Okay, what I'm basically saying here, if you're in a Citrix environment and you're deploying a desktop, and in that desktop, because a desktop is nothing without the applications, I would argue vehemently that you need to make sure that that core desktop that's being deployed to everybody has the least amount of applications that you need in there. So I'm going to rephrase that. So you want the least amount of applications to your core master image. And the reason we want that is because the fewer applications we got onto your core master image, the less updates and redeployments you're going to need. And this is where I'm going to introduce this. This is my application management approach. It's an idealistic view, and it doesn't need to be stuck to religiously. However, I just want the framework to be understood. So as mentioned here, the Enterprise Layer Manager. And I want, as I said, to completely ignore that. You can use ELM or don't have to use ELM. Whatever method you're using to create your core master image, keep it minimum. Keep it on a very simplistic level. Break your applications down into two tiers. And I wouldn't go any further than that. Anybody that's got 30, 40 applications or above, this is going to be relevant to. For the customers out there that basically have very few applications and they run their entire business from the Microsoft Ops stack, this probably isn't relevant to you, but for the majority of users this will be utterly relevant. I mean, how many times have we come across an application that requires a particular version of Java that conflicts with another version? Yeah, just one of multitude of many things, including like Oracle. Yeah, and we've seen many applications. We had one client that had 3,000 applications. Now the idea of thinking of being able to get them all neatly working in one image is naive and stupid, and yeah, you just created a hellhole for yourself, for you and your users. So I mentioned before there were two tiers. The first tier is what I call a tier 1 application, and a tier 1 application should be clearly defined as being an application that pretty much everybody uses. So the obvious, the Microsoft Office, the Office 365, the Adobe Reader, Chrome, or whatever browser you're going to be using, but try to keep those applications as minimal as possible. And that goes into your core image, and you may have different images. You may have an image for finance, for example. You'd have different requirements. It doesn't matter too much if you've got a number of images. Now the next challenge is how to get the applications into that image, and that's the bit that we're going to be covering next. So now we've got the core desktop deployed with a minimum set of applications in it. We need to think about ways that we can get the applications into that image with the least amount of disruption to the users. And bear in mind, the utter foremost of this particular presentation is about protecting user experience. Fight for your users. Okay, and this was it's all about. So I'm going to talk about this. This is a flow chart that I put together that was designed for a larger corporate client, but it doesn't mean it can't apply further down the chain. And I would argue that if you've got anything sort of 30, 40 applications or above, you really should seriously consider this. It looks more complex than it really needs to be. I'm going to dive straight into this, and there's really 3 levels I'm going to be talking about here. And the first level is going to be talking about Microsoft AppV. Now, if you've used Microsoft AppV, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you don't know AppV, AppV is a Microsoft technology that basically allows you to, instead of installing an application, you can what they call record an application, including all the installers and everything that application needs to get it working, including any hacks, any license keys, can be recorded, and they all get bundled up into like this package. And to launch the application, there's something called an OSD file that corresponds to it. And if you add a user to a member of a particular group and you publish that application in AppV, that user, when they launches that application, doesn't get installed into the environment. It gets streamed on demand. So it's like a streaming technology. So a really neat feature with Citrix is that the AppV agent is now integrated into the Citrix receiver. So if you're a member of a particular domain group that's got access to an application that's been streamed by AppV, they will automatically get that application on their start menu, and they'll also get it in their desktop depending on how you defined and set those objectives. From a user's point of view, they see no distinct difference. They just see a shortcut to an application and then they launch it. But the important thing is that application is not actually installed in that environment. It's literally streamed on demand. Now you can do some clever things within Citrix. You can actually have those applications pre-streamed ready, so when the user clicks on them, it's pretty much an instant launch. But the beauty here is that application is not installed in that desktop. So should there be a requirement for a change for that particular application, you're making changes in AppV and you're not making any changes to the core desktop. That means that you don't need to deploy the desktop again to get those application changes out to the users. Now, really key point here that I'm still shocked at this. The number of customers that don't know this. If you run in Citrix, you will probably, most likely, if you're doing it properly, will have something called an RDSH cow. Now, when RDSH moved away from terminal services or RDS and moved into what we call RDSH, the price went up, and the price went up by, I think it's £5 or $5. But what that meant to the users is that Microsoft did do a good thing, because what they bundled with that is they bundled Microsoft AppV. So if you've got RDSH cows, which if you run in Citrix, I can almost guarantee you will have, you are also licensed for Microsoft AppV. And if you're licensed for AppV, I highly recommend that you use it. It's important to know AppV is not the panacea. It's not going to solve everything. Okay, there are defined guidelines on applications that are compatible with AppV and the ones that are not. If you follow the Microsoft guidelines, and I've got a separate flowchart that if anybody wants it, please reach out to me. I will give it to you. that will determine whether an application is compatible with AppV or not. And if you follow the Microsoft guidelines to the letter of the law, you will find that probably only about a third of your applications are compatible with AppV. Now there are hacks, okay, and there are ways around those as well. And one of the biggest ones that we find is quite often you have an application that has a device driver installed in it, and by criteria Microsoft says that's not a compatible application, but there's nothing stopping you from pre-installing that driver, for example, into the core master image, and then it works absolutely fine. We had a large client. They had around about 700 applications, and they got 98% of their applications working in AppV, and I'd say huge congratulations to them, because I can tell you now they have a very stress-free life. AppV is a great technology, but understand its limitations. You know, I don't recommend that you put those hacks in place. It works. You can do it, and people have successfully done it, but it's still a hack. And what you may end up there is something called a support nightmare for the people that are coming behind you. You have to think long term. You have to think supportability. If you needed to get vendor support on this, they are pretty much going to say to you, sorry, that is not supported. In a production environment, I do not recommend you take that course of action. Stick to the Microsoft guidelines, knowing that AppV's great technology, but it has its limitation and it has its place. Now, one of the challenges we also need to consider when you're running AppV as well, because you're streaming that application on demand into that desktop, CPU, memory, disk IOPS are consumed within that desktop. So if you have a particularly weighty application that is consuming a large amount of resources, this is where the flowcharts begins to make sense. Ignoring this section here, because the section here, because as I said, this was an idealistic view. And in my world, I would like every application to be proper packaged, right transform files, but I know that's not always relevant. And it's not right for most people. It's a bit overkill for a lot of companies. So we can ignore this step for the moment. But again, if you want to know more, contact me. So the first challenge is to determine whether an application is compatible with AppV. And if it is, great. Add it to your application deployment method. And it doesn't have to be SCCM. It could be anything. Okay, guys, it can be Intune. It can be direct with an AppV. Okay, providing you have a very simple way of deploying it to the users, and that's generally putting them in a domain group that gives them access to that application. And then you test it. Do not put it live straight away. This is production. You should really have a sort of pre-production UAT test or dev environment where you're making changes to that environment and not to the real users. And one of the tests that you're going to be performing is the performance tests. And I would say if any application consumes 20% of any resource, CPU, memory or disk IOPS, don't stream that application directly into the desktop, because that's going to affect everybody in all of the desktop experience. And there is a much better way of doing that. If it is acceptable, then you publish to the user, job done, good. And every time there's a change to the application, you don't need to redeploy the desktop. Now, if you find that the application is compatible with AppV, however, there is a performance issue, this brings us down to the second layer. Okay, in order to make sense of the second layer, we need to go to the third layer, which is basically, if you know Citrix, you will know what I'm talking about, because it's the bread and butter of the technology. Citrix Virtual Apps and Citrix Virtual Desktops. We've been talking in context of the desktop, but the core technology that drives Citrix has been its application publishing features, and that's where it stands out head and shoulders above any other technology. There are so many clever things you can do. So if you've got a virtual desktop, and in that virtual desktop you've got the Citrix receiver, that Citrix receiver is set to automatically log into a storefront site that is connected to a separate Citrix farm that is publishing applications to the user, those applications again will appear as shortcuts icons on the user's desktop, and it will appear as shortcut items on their start menu as well. The user doesn't know, they click a button and they launch an app. But what's happening in the background here is that is logging onto a separate server, launching that application on a server that is separate from your desktop. So the performance of the application does not impact the performance of the desktop that you're launching from. Does that make sense? You're not running that application on your desktop. It's running on a server elsewhere. Now Citrix do loads and loads of clever things like session pre-launching, session sharing, so you don't go for the whole logon process every single time to make that transition and application publishing as painless as possible for the users. But from the user's point of view, they just see a shortcut, they launch it and it works. They have no idea in the complexity of that. Now, it was important to understand that, because what you can do, if we come here and we go back to the point where we said the application performance is unacceptable, we can actually publish the streamed application from another Citrix Virtual Apps server into the user's desktop. And we do that by publishing the OSD file as a published application. And that means that application will be streamed to that separate server, to that other server, and then be launched on that server. And using Citrix technology, it will be presented as a normal application from the user's point of view. Now that seems immensely complex, but these are the things that we need to go through in order to protect user experience. Keep coming back to that one point. I know that what I'm proposing here is probably adding in layers of complexity to the back-end administration of this and the deployment and such forth, but it's there for an honourable cause, which is for fighting for the best possible user experience. So when you think about this, you can roll out a desktop that is pretty lean in terms of resource allocations, knowing that you're always protecting that experience from a user's point of view, and anything complex is going to sit outside here. And whether that's a means via streamed on demand using AppV, a published applications using Citrix Virtual Apps, or it's a streamed application that is then published to a separate Citrix Virtual Apps server on a separate server and then launched within the desktop. Now we do have a third layer which I want to talk about, and I want to talk about it because it's becoming almost like a modern buzzword. Wrapped applications, MSIX and such forth, virtual hard drives being layered at the point of login, where applications are deployed using some form of layering technology. Now Citrix have their own, Microsoft have their own, and there are various technologies that do very similar things. I'm going to be honest here, I am not a fan of them. And I'm not a fan of them because lots and lots of things. There's too many assumptions. And in a minute, when we come back to the user profiles, this will probably start to make sense. Now, the biggest assumption that you're going to be making on here is that you know the desktop you're logging on to, and that may well change. And I want you to start to formulate a picture here, because listen, if we do this, it's quite obviously we can work out here at any given point, any user could be logged on to multiple operating systems at exactly the same time. And this is one of the fundamental failings of app layering. There's too many assumptions here. We have to fight hard for user experience. App layering has the place in the world. And if you follow my flowchart here, it will say to you, if none of the other technologies work, the fallback is to use app layering. And if you don't know what app layering is, it's just simply you install an application into a separate virtual hard drive, and that everything that application needs is in there. So the application does not know it's being redirected to a virtual hard drive. It is unaware of it. So we don't have any application compatibility issues. But just think about this. For every application that you layer, those hard drives need to be mounted at the point of login. So every single application that you layer is going to increase the logon time. And if you know anything about Citrix or any terminal services, you will know that the system is under its greatest strain during logon events and log-off events. In fact, we have a word for it. We call it the logon storm and we call it the log-off storm. In order to give the best user experience, we need that logon as short as possible. That way, the system is under its greatest strain for the shortest period of time. And then when you start layering in applications, you're going to do nothing but compound that issue out. Okay? If you're dealing with a handful of users, you probably be unawares of this. But when you're dealing in hundreds and if not thousands of users, this is a real big problem. Okay? So I just want you to contemplate that at this stage here. So I'm not a fan of layering. Okay, and it has its place. Sadly, I have seen customers that have chose layering as their first port of call for application deployment because it's easy. Okay, it's not best for your users. I'm going to tell that. I'm going to state that here. It's not best for your users. But I'm going to move on from here because the astute amongst you would definitely recognize that this idea and methodology, idealistic view of the world, does bring along additional challenges that need to be contemplated as part and parcel of the solution, and that is the profile management challenge. I said to you earlier, it's possible that users could be logged on to at the same time with different operating systems. I can tell you that that's not, they will be, they will be, and if we haven't thought about this, if profile management is an afterthought, you failed already. You've failed already. So many times I see profile related issues today. I'm still shocked by it, okay? This is a subject close to my heart because I developed this software. It used to be called TPMM, which was short for Thintech Profile Management Methodology. I say it's a product. It's not a product. It's a methodology. It's a methodology of managing profiles. So there are various solutions out there. CPM is great if you log on to the same desktop every single time. Then they are layering. They've got the equivalent of FS Logics now. Great, great, great. But when you start going into this type of scenario, not so great. You're logged onto multiple operating systems at the same time. They're not designed for that. Okay. It's not short failing in any product. Okay, they're just knowing the right technology for the right solution. And if we want to create a solution where it's agnostic, where the users can be logged onto multiple operating systems to give you this level of flexibility, we need to seriously think about the profiles. So I'm not going to talk about traditional approach. We just know that they don't work at the moment. Okay, and we know we need to be logged on at multiple systems at the same time. And we want a consistent user experience. The users don't want a different desktop, different My Documents, different favorites, different whatever. You know, they just want it consistent. And the way we overcome that, and these are some of the secrets that we put in place. This is ThinkSync. It's the new name for TPMM. So anybody out there is familiar with TPMM, it's now called ThinkSync. And ThinkSync has done that because it's more in line with what it does, because it's a profile synchronization technology. This is going to start right at the very beginning. This is free, okay? This is not a commercial product. This is something that we developed over the years that is completely free. I'm going to do my best to explain this in a very short period of time, but this warrants a whole video on its own right, and I do encourage you to reach out to me if you want to know more. And if you feel it needs a separate video, then please let me know. I'll happily do it. So what ThinkSync is a solution that has, right from the very beginning, has eliminated the need for profiles. So I'm going to repeat that one statement. How can you have profile problems if you don't have profiles? Now the question comes down to is how do we actually do that? Okay. So the way we do it is I'm going to be revealing some of our secrets in the way that we do that. So first and foremost, we have this little executable here that's called tpmm.exe, and what that does is that's nothing to install. It's something that sits on your NetLogon share that during log off it calls that file. So we have a log off script. then we pass it a couple of parameters, and one of the parameters is we're telling it to save the settings. Okay, and then we tell it what to save. So in combination with this executable file, there is an INI file. So this INI file has listed in it all of the things that we're going to record into a binary OPS file. And in there we can store file data, registry data. So the secret source within this is not so much this tpmm.exe, it's what the contents of the INI file. So over the years we have learned what needs to go in there, and that is the main secret source behind the success of this ThinkSync. You can have our INI file for free, you just need to contact me. That records the user personalized settings into this binary file and then gets stored into the home folder. And because it's a script, we can pretty much do anything we want with that OPS file. So we've written some scripts that have, for example, timestamp check-in. We can create a history of people's profile settings. In conjunction with that, we can have a self-service end user state where we could put a shortcut in the desktop where the users can restore their profile from whatever day that they want to. So you can bring a whole level of stability to the environment. So just remember, it's a script and we're in full control of that. You know, there's some great imaginative ideas out there that I highly encourage you to use your imagination. Realize this is a very powerful tool that takes away every limitation that every other profile solution throws at you. Now in conjunction, and this is secret source number 2. Secret source number 2 is when we deploy this, we deploy the servers in OUs, in Active Directory, with group policies that get applied to the machine and not to the user. That means that whoever logs onto them, this group policy, because it's the most local, will override any other setting that you've got set anywhere else. And one of the things that we changed is that the users will map a particular drive letter to a home folder. And it's really important that it gets defined as a home folder because we use system variables. And that's really important. Say for example, we map the drive letter H to a network share for the user's home folder. And that's where we store the profile. And that becomes really important. So we can start working to what we call known constants. And one of the known constants we're dealing with right here, right now, is the fact that whoever logs onto this machine will have the drive letter H mapped to a particular network location that we have fully controlled. And you think, what's so important about that? I can tell you now that's very important, because combining ThinkSync with this known drive mapping, we can hard code redirected items back to that particular location. Things like my desktop, my downloads, my documents, all of the stuff that we would classify as being quite weighty, that you have very little control over, that we want outside of the user profile. And that becomes really important, because we go back a couple of slides. Say here you're launching a published application into your virtual desktop. Guess what? We're doing exactly the same. We're mapping the H drive, and that H drive is going to be hard coded to redirect my documents, desktop, favorite, whatever, back to this particular location. So what you end up with there is a very consistent user experience. So when they say things on their desktop from their published application, it gets synchronized across all environments. When they say stuff to my documents, it's there across any environment. So let's go back. So here we have it now. We have hard-coded redirection of a large proportion of the user profile back into the user's home folder. We have binary OPS files with all of the personalization, and as I said, the secret source in this is in the INI file, and as I said before, you just need to reach out to me and I will give you our INI file. Okay, it's taken us a long time to perfect that. So then you've got to ask the real question, what's left? Because I can tell you now, 99% of a user profile is complete and utter junk that you don't need to save. When you see these 100 gig profiles, guess what? You don't need to save any of that. Most of it is rubbish. Yep. So we're only saving the things that we know that are needed. So that means only 1% of the user profiles saved, but it is enough. And the users will absolutely notice zero, nada, no difference. They just get a desktop. They get everything back to as it was before, and they have no idea in the complexity involved in this. So now we have those two elements. Can you see now why we don't need profiles? Another layer of secrecy within the way we manage things here. That local policy that we define that says that you're going to have the drive letter H mapped when you log in, no matter who you are, will also set a permissions that in the registry that the user has the opportunity to change the profile type for a registry flag to say what type of profile you've got. Because we found out if you don't have a local profile or you don't have a roaming profile, if you've got, say, mandatory profile or any other form of profile, things like .NET based applications will refuse to run. You can run them if you've gone through the pain of working out the permissions, and there's a little tool called Caspol where you can define the trusted locations, but trust me, it's an absolute ball ache. If this isn't complicated enough as it is, you don't need it. If you set, for example, whilst the user is logged on to the environment, they have a local profile, guess what? You have absolutely no issues at all. Now, anybody that knows this type of technology will immediately alarm bells will be going off in their head, because there is zero, nada, no mechanism anywhere in any of the group policy settings that state there's an option to delete locally cached local profiles at the point of log off. And you think, well, what's the importance of that? I can tell you it's a big problem. Anybody who's been in this game long enough will know orphan profiles, locally cached local profiles are a big issue. Okay, so you want them deleted at the point of log off. If you defined it as roaming and then you set a group policy that says delete locally cached roaming profiles, which is a valid registry item in or a group policy setting, it's not very reliable. The number of times where they hang, crash, and they don't fully delete because there's some sort of security application, something embedded. It's usually Adobe as being the biggest one, and you end up with what we call these orphan profiles, and that causes a hell of a problem for your users, because in the hierarchy scheme of things, it would be always the local profile, the most local will always take precedence. So the local profile will take precedence over whatever profile you got in place. So it's really critical that we delete those profiles. So I said to you, another secret change we will make is we change the permissions on that particular registry key that allow the user to change the profile type. It's like magic. You can literally see in real time as you make the changes, and if you know the registry flags, to literally switch the users from roaming, mandatory, temporary, local, and you can literally see it. And when you look at the profile, you can see as the user changes that registry type. So what we do, in order to give the maximum application compatibility, we make sure that the users have a locally cached local profile, because we change it, because we haven't come to log on yet, but that's one of the changes we make. And the only reason they can make that change is because embedded within the group policy that defines the mapping of the home drive, we have adjusted the permissions so that we set a registry key that adjusts permissions that they can make changes to that registry flag. And when they log off, we change that profile type from local, and you can actually watch it in real time, from local to temporary. And the moment you change it to temporary, you don't need to define any delete locally cached local profiles or delete locally cached roaming profiles. Windows will automatically do it. Windows will delete utterly that profile. It's really clean, it's really fast, and it's very efficient. Now the reverse side of this is when the user logs back in, we need to get all of their settings back. But we want to do that in the most efficient way as we possibly can. Recognize the hierarchy in the way that group policy is defined. We couldn't do this as a logon script, and there were various ways that we used to do this in the past, and one of them was we used to take leverage of the app setup key. That's a registry setting, but that key only exists on services that are running terminal services. So things like VDI, virtual desktops, that key doesn't exist. So what we've done is we've written a custom stub path, and that custom stub path is really important because what that does is that runs the logon process. But more importantly, because it runs after group policies are run, they're going to have mapped their H drive to that particular location. They will have access to their OPS file, and more importantly, the redirection, as we said before, it's been hard coded, but it's been hard coded not to use a UNC path like /7 whatever they're going to be calling it, because we know that user will have a H drive and we know exactly where it's going to go. The redirection is like H:/my documents, H:/desktop, as an example. That gives us what we call instantaneous redirection. And on that desktop you saw earlier, I may go back to it in a moment, that's exactly what we've done. The desktop has been instantly redirected back to the user's home folder, and we're referring not to a UNC path, we're referring to the drive letter. Because it's being launched at the point of login using a stub path, so that means it's done under the context of the user, so all the drive mappings will be in place already. We can do this sort of injection, redirection instantaneously. So once you're logged in, and the second task we're going to be doing is calling this tpmm.exe, and this time we're passing it a parameter to say that we're replaying the user settings, and in this time, instead of reporting it to the INI file, we're reporting it to the OPS file that's stored in the user home folder. In fact, what we do, we found it to be quicker if we, at the point of login, if we copy that over into the temp location and then replay it, we found it to be much quicker. And then that gives them back. Then the stub path holds the shell, replays a setting, and gives the desktop from the user. Now it seems mightily complex. Now I understand that might well put a lot of people off, but I beg you to persevere. Remember, we are fighting for user experience here, because this opens up, the moment you understand this opens up a whole wealth of opportunity and removes 99% of the limitations that get imposed upon you because of profile management. So I'm going to go back to that slide again. I could probably keep going back here. Think about this. You logged onto your desktop, whatever that may well be. That may well be Windows 10, that may well be Windows 11, it might be an RDS desktop, it may well be a Server 2019, maybe Server 2022, I don't know what that may well be, and I don't particularly care. This is an operating system agnostic solution. Yep. In the INI file, we specify what to save using the system variables like %appdata and such forth. So if they change location, it doesn't matter. And that doesn't matter from the point of recording, and it doesn't matter from the point of replaying. So for example, you could be in a Windows 11 desktop here, and you could be in a Server 2008 R2 desktop. Who cares? We're launching not a desktop but a published application, and you may have to do that because of application compatibility issues. So I challenge you to go and find a better way of doing this, because I've spent years on this, and we don't care. Okay, so when they log in, they will get the same My Desktop, they will get the same My Documents, they will get whatever we want. We're in full control here. And what we suggest is that these servers deploy to a separate OU, and that means that separate OU can have different group policies assigned to it, and one of the group policy settings that we're going to define here is what INR file we're going to be applying for that particular desktop. That means that you can just record just those application settings as tiny OPS files just for those applications. Okay, it's a lot to take in, guys, and I appreciate you persevering, and if you've stayed around this long, that means you're interested, and I congratulate you and I thank you for listening on to me rant on. But like I said, it's a subject that really holds true with me, and I spent a long time working on this, and you can have this for free. Okay, you just need to contact me. Well, I'm going to go back to that slide. Now I'm going to add one final piece to this. Now one final piece to this is this, that we have used ThinkSync to overcome an industry problem that nobody else has been able to solve. And that is, if you're a hybrid environment, if you have a mixture of desktops, say you've got Azure desktops, maybe you've got Azure domain devices, and you've a mixture between a virtual desktop and a local PC, there's no solution in the world that's really going to properly synchronize your profile across all of those settings. So in conjunction with FS Logic's containers and even Citrix files and ShareFile and ThinkSync, we've been able to get your local desktop synchronized with your cloud-based virtual desktop. I won't cover it in this video. Just know at this stage there is a solution for it. If you want an answer now, just let me know. Just contact me and I would show you how we do that. That one warrants a video in its own right. Now, you wouldn't think there's a massive use case for that out there, but we're finding that landscape is changing on a daily basis. And so there was a problem and we had to find a solution, and we have got a solution. So if you're facing that challenge today, you know who to ask. Okay, I've got a solution for you. I'm going to end the video here. I really hope that was not too much for you. I know it's a lot of information to take in, which really leads me onto my last slide. And that last slide is, there's my contact details. Please reach out to me. If any of this resonates with you, any of it doesn't make sense, anything you want to know more on, you know where to find me. Okay, I'm not hiding. I'm here. Just contact me, and I really want to help. Well, that ends the video. I hope it was useful, and I'll speak to you all again very soon.